You're listening to the Smart Policy Podcast, a production of the University of Tennessee's Institute for Public Service. Cannabis, cannabinoids, and cannabimimetics like Delta-8, THC-P, and many others are increasingly common across America, including in the state of Tennessee, where we have passed numerous regulations on the industry in recent years. And in states where cannabis has been fully legalized, some products containing Delta-9 THC, the psychoactive ingredient of what is defined in Tennessee state law as marijuana, the concentrations have grown to historically unprecedented levels, with some products boasting 90 to 95% potency. Now, despite the widespread availability of these high-THC cannabis products, however, it seems that the general conversation around the safety and efficacy of these substances remains grounded in a lot of misunderstandings.
It's what I hear the most from adolescents that they use. They say, I smoke weed because it helps my anxiety. But we do know those higher potency products actually increase the amount of anxiety that people feel overall.
Not to mention a lack of awareness about the concerning side effects of these high-potency, synthetically manipulated products, which are not at all like the cannabis of the 90s or earlier.
If someone has had a psychotic episode while under the influence of cannabis, but then it dissipates once the cannabis wears off, that is an indication that if they continue to use, they're putting themselves at higher risk to develop a long-term psychotic disorder like schizophrenia.
My guest this month is Dr. Kristen Gilliland, Director of Outreach and Advocacy Programs and Assistant Professor of Research at the Warren Center for Neuroscience Drug Discovery at Vanderbilt University. On top of an extensive career in the field, Dr. Gilliland tragically lost her son to a drug overdose in 2019, just a couple of years after he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, Dr. Gilliland works to provide innovative, evidence-based, and compassionate prevention education to teens about the reality of the modern cannabis market, which has been significantly altered since it became a legal, corporatized, and multi-billion-dollar industry.
Because of the legalization, there's this reduced perception of harm. As a society, we need to understand that your child probably knows way more about something when they're in middle school and high school. They've looked it up, they're talking to their friends, and we need to have these important conversations with our children. The reason that I am the Director of Outreach and Advocacy Programs is kind of a long story, but I'll abbreviate it. I have a son who I lost through an accidental drug overdose. He was 22 years old, and he had suffered from schizophrenia. And I do believe that his schizophrenia was somehow triggered by his use of high-potency cannabis when he was younger. What I will say is that he had psychotic episodes that I think his use of cannabis actually increased his risk of developing schizophrenia. I'm not going to say the cannabis caused it. I'm going to say somehow there was an association between it. I came to the Warren Center here in Nashville, Tennessee at Vanderbilt from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I was associate professor of chemistry there, and I taught neurochemistry and the chemistry of drugs and poisons and organic chemistry, all the subjects that nobody wants to take. And I came here to find new treatments for schizophrenia. So the Warren Center, where I'm at now, what we do is we find new pharmaceutical treatments for devastating brain diseases like schizophrenia, like Alzheimer's disease, like Parkinson's disease. So I came here on a sabbatical to try and research schizophrenia, and that's when I lost my son. After he had developed schizophrenia, he started to use substances to just try to alleviate his symptoms. And that's very common for people who suffer from schizophrenia, is using other substances as a way just to quiet the voices, to deal with what's going on in their head. And I wanted to find something I could do to help him, because as every person who has had someone in their family, in their life that has struggled with substance use disorder or addiction knows, their brain has been hijacked by that substance.
Right.
And it's very difficult to get them help when they don't want it.
Yeah.
So I came here to the Warren Center. I lost my son, and I knew I had to do something in his honor. And so I decided that it was about 2 years into it that I wanted to try to educate kids about their brain, about their developing brain, and to teach them the impact of both stress, social media, substance use on that developing brain, in a way to help other kids and families so they don't go through what I went through and my son went through and our family went through. And so that's where I began, and I've just been kind of full speed ahead since then.
Well, that's really, really vital work. It feels like trying to summarize this is dismissive of how important it is, because this is such a critical problem. While we are seeing amongst younger demographics a reported reduction in drug use, and I do think a lot of those numbers are mostly true. I do think there's probably some underreporting still going on. We're seeing a reduction in use of fentanyl in teens, for example, or heroin or prescription opioids. We're seeing a reduction there. Still very low numbers, but at the same time, we are seeing a very sharp rise in cannabis, cannabimimetics, cannabinoids, a number of these derivatives. Not to mention other things like, say, benzodiazepines and other substances. So there's of course a whole lot to say there, but I couldn't help but reflect on how you very clinically described what may have happened with your son. And if I may, it sounds like it may have been a bit analogous to what is said about, say, seizure thresholds. Everybody has a level at which they are susceptible to having a seizure, and say if you drink some alcohol, that will lower your seizure threshold, make it more likely that whatever ends up triggering it triggers the seizure. It sounds like there may have been a similar thing from if I understood correctly, that your son had some risk of schizophrenia already, but taking this high THC, this high-potency cannabis product, may have lowered the threshold for ultimately developing that. Is that about what you might say, that perhaps without it he may have avoided that diagnosis?
All the literature points to, and I want to give credit to all these amazing people that are doing the research in the impact of cannabis, both positive and negative, because there are benefits to using some of the cannabinoids. There are benefits.
Sure.
But I will say that what we're looking at as far as risk for developing schizophrenia or even psychosis is a genetic predisposition in the family, so a first relative in the family. We're looking at, and I should mention also bipolar disorder. So genetic predisposition, frequency of use, and high potency, definitely cannabis, so anything greater than 10% THC in the cannabis product, and also when they started using and how frequently they use. Those all increase the risk. And if someone has had a psychotic episode while under the influence of cannabis, but then it dissipates once the cannabis wears off, that is an indication that if they continue to use, they're putting themselves at higher risk to develop a long-term psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. So the general public needs to know that if that ever happens, that is a red flag. You probably carry some type of genetic predisposition to these types of long-term psychotic disorders.
Yeah.
So just to be very, very cautious about that.
Yeah, that's definitely a really crucial point. In terms of that potency, you're not wrong at all about literature showing that there is an increased risk to negative outcomes clinically with high-potency cannabis. And again, any concentration is greater than 10% THC, the psychoactive ingredient, as you said. And drug seizure data from law enforcement is showing that the average concentration is 15-16% of just the flower, the herb, or what we think of when we think of weed. And that being said, though, gummies and vapes, these concentrations are astronomical. Some of the vapes I've seen are 95% potency. And the way some of these things are sold and marketed, it's very clear they're trying to go as high potency as possible. This kind of reminds me of a conversation we had with the author Sam Quinones about the hyperpotency of all things, and that now that we've taken this particular route with how cannabis has been legalized across different states, is it's allowed this patchwork with essentially no regulation or oversight, and companies are making products that are as high potency as possible, as addicting as possible. Anything that has a euphoric effect is going to have a risk for overuse, dependence, addiction. And I don't know, this seems like such a crucial thing, is that it's just so available. There's no oversight. It doesn't have the same degree of marketing regulations that we impose on, say, nicotine or alcohol, which is a pretty significant concern, especially since there are pervasive understandings that there's no side effects to cannabis. Does that ring true to you at all, that part of that conversation?
Definitely. If I had a magic wand, I think the one thing, kind of something as far as regulation goes, is I would love to see where we cap off the THC content at nothing higher than 10%. And I think you would get a lot of pushback, because now what's happened is, because of this higher potency THC, and you nailed it, because you said that people are becoming addicted to it. And that is that's a true statement, that the higher the potency, the more addictive the substance is. And it's causing this addiction, which leads to cannabis use disorder, which means that, these people are using, some people, it's like wake and bake, as they call it,
Yeah, absolutely.
So just starting from the first thing in the morning. I can't tell you the number of times, and here we are in Tennessee, I'm walking my dog at 6 a.m. and these cars go by and I'm like, whew, it's definitely. So I think that this is the issue of that. And with my sons, they grew up in California, and surfers, we all surfed. And I will say that it's kind of the culture.
Oh, yeah.
Getting high and getting on your surfboard, that's a very common culture that happens there. So I do want to say that during that time period, of course, as parents, we were against him using it, but because of the legalization, there's this reduced perception of harm amongst the general public. And I felt that, as far as I didn't really think about the change in potency. So this change in potency now, as you stated, and some of these vape pens that they're using getting up to 95%, or these, dab rigs that kids are using to dab, and what this can do to the developing brain. And this is my message. Right. We need to educate the general public about the impact of high THC potency cannabis on the developing brain.
This is really truly analogous to what's happening with opioids. We get questions a lot about how could people be taking fentanyl when they know it's so dangerous, so highly potent, that overdose is so likely with fentanyl and its analogs. And what we find ourselves having to talk about often is tolerance. You take a drug long enough, you develop a tolerance, you can take a higher dose to get the same effect. What triggered this thinking was your point that if there were a regulation capping THC, that there would be some pushback. I've heard on podcasts people talk about, mainstream podcasts. I have heard people say, I can't get high anymore, so I've created this new strain that's even stronger. And it sounds exactly the same as what we hear with opioids and meth and so on and so forth. And now, I don't know. Where does it end? You can't really get much more potent than 95, 100%, right?
Right. And I think a lot of people with the cannabis flower, and I have heard now from some sources that some of the flower now can be as high as almost 30%.
God.
Now, I don't know if I've ever, but this is what I've heard,
Right.
that it can be as, between 20 and 30% now. So, and I don't think you can get a cannabis flower to go above 30%,
No,
THC.
I think it's not unless you spray something on it. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think it's worth clarifying that back in the 90s, the average concentration of flower was 3%.
Correct. And so think about that. If it's 30%, 10 times greater, 10 times greater potency. And so just the strength of that. And to put it back to adolescence, you think about these kids who start using this from the get-go and the tolerance they'll create, just basically just using this. And then, it might start out with smoking a joint, and then it might turn to, okay, no, I'm going to use one of these vape pens that's, 70%, whatever it might be. And really looking at it, if we look at the weed from the 90s, even, we could say that that was the equivalent of, just as far as concentration wise, of the active, the intoxicant alcohol versus THC. It's like the equivalent of a Bud Light. Right? Or you look about, like, as a Bud Light, about 3.5% alcohol in that,
Right.
And then you look now, if it's around, we'll say even, 15%, that's kind of like a martini, right?
Yeah.
I mean, now, and then looking at these concentrates, it's like a shot of Everclear.
Yeah.
So, we are looking at a huge change, and I'm saying they don't give the same effect, obviously,
Right.
the same psychoactive effect, but looking at just percentage of the intoxicant that's, giving that feeling comparatively, that's what's happened now. And would you want your kid to take a shot of Everclear, and go to school? No.
Right. Right, especially since cannabis has truly measurable impacts on cognition, verbal reasoning, a number of other things. So if we're talking about teens going to school, this is probably not likely to result in getting the best education you might have otherwise gotten.
Correct. And we need to educate just the general society about the endocannabinoid system where THC interacts. Understanding what that system does, because it's a beautiful system that is made basically to regulate how neurons talk to each other. And so neurons being, those who don't know, nerve cells, right? And basically the nerve cells that are specialized cells that communicate, that let us do all the things we need to do, think, walk, talk, everything, right?
Right.
So this endocannabinoid system is like a thermostat for the brain. And when the brain you might have too much activity, too much communication, then the endocannabinoids, the neurotransmitters for that system, are made on demand. And then they travel backwards to that neuron that's sending whatever neurotransmitter that might be exciting the brain or inhibiting the brain. They bind to that receptor and tell it stop releasing that neurotransmitter. So stop releasing that inhibitory neurotransmitter or that excitatory neurotransmitter. And so this is only done on demand to keep the brain in homeostasis, or like an equilibrium, right? To keep everything stable.
Regulated.
But now, so it's this incredible system that's doing everything from brain development, basically stress control, like emotion regulation, all these things.
Creativity.
Yeah. Well, you definitely need to use parts of your brain. But the one thing I want to say is the actual receptor where those endocannabinoids bind it's called the CB1, cannabinoid 1 receptor. And it is the receptor that when THC binds gives the high feeling. But it is one of the most abundant receptors in the brain. So one of the most abundant receptors in the brain. And that tells you that this system is pretty important.
Yeah.
And so when we look at these neurotransmitters binding to that receptor, it really is making sure that the brain is in homeostasis. You don't have too much activity in one area or not enough activity in another. Cognitive function, all that, it's keeping everything in harmony. So now imagine that someone is getting high. You have this system that's working on demand when it's needed, but now someone introduces THC, not on demand. So when THC binds to that receptor, the CB1 receptor, it is telling that neuron, wait, stop releasing that neurotransmitter, that inhibitory or excitatory neurotransmitter. But that's not on demand.
Right.
Right? That's only when someone takes in marijuana or takes in weed and the THC binds to the receptor. So now you have this situation where neurons, you're changing the communication of these neurons. You're changing the communication and not when it should be changed.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's what as scientists believe gives the high feeling is kind of it binding and changing all this communication, quieting some areas when they shouldn't be quieted and turning on the gas on some area that shouldn't be, ramped up. So it ends up giving that high feeling.
I'm reminded of a sequence in Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, which is a book about food, but there's a moment where he's on a hunt and he's describing, he's out in the woods for quite some time. He's looking, he's paying intense attention, and he starts to describe this feeling of almost euphoria and time dilation and an immediate connectedness between his environment, his body, all the senses all at once. And it turns out he ties into some science on this. What he was experiencing was a natural initiation of the endocannabinoid system. As you said, those receptors are all over our body. They're one of the most common or the most common receptor in the brain. Clearly, there are natural ways we can trigger this system. Probably it's related to what we might call, in a flow state, being in a flow state where you're at peak creative performance, playing music live on stage or even just practicing with your group, and you just hit that perfect moment, or you're in the midst of an art project, or as I described with Michael Pollan on that hunt, just when you are really in the zone on a particular endeavor, that you can activate these natural systems, and it's this perfect status that can be inherently very pleasurable just by living life with intense creative purpose, I guess. But as you say there too, though, that if it becomes dependent on this external dose, on an external product that is now not only triggered artificially, but in concentrations that are astronomical and are going to truly have impacts. If opioids impact the dopamine system, or alcohol on the GABA system, and so on and so forth, we know that chemicals will change the regulation of neurotransmitters. If we're externalizing our endocannabinoid system, it sounds like it's going to make it a lot harder to live a satisfying life. Am I picking up anything there?
You definitely are. And some of the scientists, and forgive me for not remembering the name of the person who did this research, but what they did is they took some rodents or mice, I think it was, but they raised mice without basically genetic engineering, and we called knockout mice. I don't know if you've heard of that, where they removed all the CB1 receptors, okay, from these mice that were born. So they had no CB1 receptors. It's amazing that we can do that in science, right? And when they give them THC, they don't get high. So that is beautiful, right? Tells you, yes, it is the CB1 receptor that does that.
That's a clean study.
But what was really interesting, those mice also had problems with regulating stress, things like that. So it tells you that in that case there, that yes, that system somehow helps to regulate stress levels. And what's really interesting is bringing it back to adolescence, that it's what I hear the most from adolescents, that they use, they say, I smoke weed because it helps my anxiety. It's one of the most common things I hear. Yeah. But we do know, and based on the literature, that those higher potency products actually increase the amount of anxiety that people feel overall. Right. And those people who use it for anxiety, definitely lower doses that can feel that relief, feel that relief. And that makes sense. If you think about, they said just without the CB1 receptors, they couldn't regulate the stress levels as well. Get a lower dose in there, you can feel that relief, but you go to those high dose levels and it can turn on the amygdala, which is the structure in the brain. You got two on either side that is linked with fear, anxiety, all of that. Right. That there are a ton of CB1 receptors in there. And so when we think about that, what you're doing is disinhibiting the amygdala. So you're actually, instead of it being inhibited, you're actually turning it on. And so the high doses is probably in some way hitting that amygdala and making that fight or flight response skyrocket.
We see this even amongst the culture of the drug itself, that is like, hey man, if you can make you paranoid, or of course there's all this talk about you just haven't found the right strain. Sounds like the science would say you haven't found the right potency. That maybe what's happening is you're having too high potency a product.
Yes.
So not to go down that road per se, just that, man, the amygdala is also tied in with memory production and trauma responses. The amygdala is significant in clinical outcomes for PTSD and all sorts of conditions. So this is really fascinating too. And again, we're talking about high potency products here. And this is what I've seen in so many videos and talks and experts saying, this isn't, the weed of the 70s, or this isn't or even of the 90s, that this is just a fundamentally different thing. So
correct. And always, as I do, bring it back to adolescents and pregnant women. So my biggest thing is saying that, people do find benefits. There are cannabinoids that are within the plant that have got to have healthy effects, and some of them do. We know that THC, some of the THC that has been used medically to treat people who are going through chemotherapy treatment, people, to help with nausea and vomiting. But what's interesting too is that looking at that, there's also something, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome.
Right.
All of a sudden, they can't stop vomiting, and it's this most painful vomiting that doctors have nicknamed scromiting, because these patients are coming into the emergency department and they are screaming and vomiting because it's so painful. And, when it started coming up when marijuana just started to kind of become recreationally legalized, is when the numbers in the emergency department started coming up, and doctors were perplexed. They're like, what is this? Because it wasn't responding to normal treatments for nausea and vomiting. So that's where the problem was just they started to look back and seeing what's in common. What do all these patients have in common? And it was cannabis.
Yeah, I've actually seen a couple of cases in Tennessee when I was in the emergency department back in the 2010s. You're right. Individuals would come in otherwise completely healthy, no other significant factor on their history of present illness other than significant chronic cannabis use.
What I think is fascinating is that we can use THC for patients who are going through chemotherapy or, just having problems with eating, and that can help them. But again, what it is low doses. It's not someone who is, addicted to cannabis. And that's where the cannabis hyperemesis comes in. And so, the part of our brainstem that kind of controls that nausea and vomiting, in this case, we're dysregulating it in some way, I think, just completely hitting it with constant THC and those CB1 receptors. And then it's just like, I'm done, I'm done doing this. Right. Yeah. So it's fascinating to me that it's such an amazing plant. And like I said, just teasing out all of the different cannabinoids, finding out what they do is going to take decades and decades. There's like over 100, right? So, and then there's also terpenes that are in there as well. So, we don't know what those do in a lot of cases too.
Right. Well, it's in terms of dosing, it's reminiscent of chemotherapy drugs. You brought up how it can be helpful in those situations, but even just on chemotherapy drugs themselves, at the right dose, they kill cancer cells. At too high a dose, they cause cancer. It sounds like a similar thing, that the dose is so crucial with any medicine or supplement. So what I love about how we've talked about so far is that though we are talking about negative consequences and potentially scary outcomes, I'm not hearing a lot of overt fear-based messaging. I'm hearing a lot of calm and rational evaluation of scientific literature, ties in with known clinical outcomes, comparison with historical trends. This seems to be this is in line with what I've seen described as the purpose of the Speaking Through Me project broadly. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what makes your messaging so engaging. Frankly, what is it makes your program so successful?
Well, my son, actually both, he has a twin brother too, and they went through the DARE program when they were young. And that may have worked for some people, but with my boys, it was very much more of a fear-based message.
Yeah.
And I have noticed when I go and speak to kids, youth, even middle school, they listen if you don't talk down to them. If you don't assume that you have to simplify something so much or just, blatantly say, don't do this. This is going to kill you, something like that, right? They listen. They listen when I teach them about the endocannabinoid system, which is crazy. Here are middle schoolers, and they ask questions afterwards. They come up and talk to me. The Speaking Through Me project is a way to deliver the prevention message through education, through compassion. I do feel that a lot of kids can resonate with my son's story because he had dealt with anxiety, some depression when he was younger in middle school. And that's what made him maybe seek out people who were, at that time, maybe seek out substances. And he hung out with a crowd that was trying out a lot of things. And whether that's curiosity, whether it's, and these are the things, whether it's curiosity, whether it's pure approval, whether it's, trying to escape something, that's what we need to get down to. That's what we need to find out, to find the correct message to give to kids. And so I am trying this avenue of using education, treating youth and adolescents like, you can get this. And you can understand this. And some of this stuff is what I would teach to college kids, but these youth, they know so much because they have the internet just in the palm of their hand. And one of the most difficult things for me is I've had this problem where I might go to some schools and the parents have said that they don't want their child to hear any drug names. Because so they may have relayed that to the school. I don't want my child to hear the word marijuana, weed, whatever. So I have been told that I can't say the name of the drug. I can talk about it, but I can't say the name of the drug. And this is where, to me, it's, as a society, we need to understand that your child probably knows way more about something when they're in middle school and high school. They've looked it up. They're talking to their friends. And we need to have these important conversations with our children. You need to have these conversations. If you think bringing them up is going to make it so they don't use, I would disagree. That's all I would say. I would disagree because I truly believe that knowledge is power. And we need to have these difficult conversations, whether it's about drugs, whether it's about suicide, whether it's about depression, anxiety, all of these concepts. Because with my son, he started using because he was anxious. And yes, we did bring him to therapists, but I wish I would have found the right therapist for him and had him deal with that. And this is the problem, I believe, with so many kids who are using. I'll ask him, when you smoke weed, does it help with your anxiety? He said, yes, it totally goes away. And I said, okay, but does it come back? Yes, it does. And I said, okay, so you're masking the anxiety. You're not dealing with it. Yeah. We need to get to the root. We need to find out what is causing that issue. And when I did this Speaking Through Me, this documentary, it was truly trying to tie together that, these three young adults that are in the film were interviewed, and one has anorexia and bulimia. One has, had tried to commit suicide, severe depression, major depression disorder. And the other was addicted to heroin, which eventually turned to fentanyl. And what they all had in common, even though they all had kind of different trajectories in this devastating disorders or diseases that they developed, that it really came down to them being young and feeling like they weren't enough. It came down to them being between 8 to 11 years old and feeling like they weren't worthy. Every one of them. And so it was really, that's what we need to get to now. As a society, we are so quick to try and escape our emotions. We're so quick to try and, pick up that phone and just keep scrolling. And then we have these algorithms that keep feeding into us what we're looking at. And we never get that break to actually feel. And this is what we need to do. I believe. I'm preaching right now, but this is what I feel we need to do is we really need to learn how to deal with our emotions and get to that and learn, for me, about the adolescent brain. Start young, teach about your brain. The brain is beautiful and it's going through the most magnificent neurobiological changes during adolescence. And kids don't know this, parents don't know this. We tell kids, your prefrontal cortex doesn't develop until you're 25. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Let's teach kids what that means. And so that they can use that to their advantage so that they can grow up to be who and how they want to be.
You've already invoked it, but I was going to bring it up next is social media and technology and the relationship with all of this, just youth development, mental health, risk of substance use, on and on. It's undeniable that it's got to be playing some role.
It's a huge role. I mean, when we look at the dopamine reward center, which social media hits, and I think a lot of people think, oh, it's just drugs. They hear the reward center, they think drugs. And let me take that back, because a lot of people now, it's become because of Dr. Anna Lemke has a great book called Dopamine Nation. And so she has educated a lot of society with that book, which thank you, Dr. Lemke. It's awesome. And I've used her analogy a lot, but just looking at social media, even from the period of doing the post. So a child or adolescent, you put your post on, even an adult, put the post on. And what are you hoping to get? You put the post up because you're hoping to get likes, comments, positive feedback, right? So you put the post up, and then the minute you get that notification, and this is where I think all kids, adults, anybody, turn off any notifications, because what it does, the minute that notification, you see it on your phone, you instantly want to pick it up. And that's a dopamine hit right there. Just the actual notification signals, it's the motivation, drives the motivation to pick up your phone. And then you go and you pick up your phone, you open it, you scroll, and you see the positive feedback. And then more dopamine. And then you go through, and what does that make you want to do? I mean, you have it's dopamine drives the motivation. It's the pursuit of something, the pursuit of a drug, the pursuit to, post something on social media. So what you're doing from the time you post to the time you get the feedback and the notifications, all just dopamine is giving these hits of dopamine that is reinforcing what you're doing. And it reinforces you to post again because basically you look and say, well, I got this positive feedback. Your reward system says, oh, remember this. I mean, positive feelings, all of that, that's good. It means that you have friends, you have things that are going to support your well-being, your survival, right? And so you post again in the hopes that that's going to happen. Now, but if you're to post again and you don't get as many likes or comments, how do you feel?
Terrible.
You feel awful. You don't feel as good, right? And that is basically the pendulum swinging in the dopamine reward center. And it happens all the time, but where you're going from pleasure and then to pain. So it's like this teeter-totter that Dr. Lemke talks about. And it's basically that the dopamine spike, you get that release of dopamine. The brain has to regain homeostasis in that reward center. So you kind of have this decrease in dopamine, right? Kind of this cleanup crew that comes around and cleans up all the dopamine. And when there's no dopamine in there, you don't feel very good.
Right.
Right? And so then the balance has to come back. So you get this kind of just little spurts of dopamine to bring the levels back in the reward center to stable again, to homeostasis, equilibrium. But if you keep doing it over and over and over, it's like anything, like with a drug, your brain will take those receptors, take those things and start taking them away, because it's like, I can't keep producing all this dopamine. I can't keep up with you. Yeah. And so when you start removing those receptors, you start decreasing the amount of dopamine. And then if you keep repeating those activities, the more you keep posting and posting, and what's going to happen is that dopamine is going to dry up more in the reward center, and you're going to feel pretty crappy most of the time, because now your new homeostasis, or your set point, is now not tilted like just level. It's now tilted more towards that pain side. And so you're going to be in this state where you're going to keep trying to get to that initial feeling you once felt, but you're never going to get there because you are decreasing the amounts of dopamine in the reward circuit.
We just saw a study come out that said basically exactly that. And addictive use trends or trajectories, I think the studies, that is the word the study used, of various technologies, this of any screen time, could be video games, social media, addictive use trajectories, not just use period, but addictive use of them, was tied with worse mental health, suicidality, and there were some interesting differences in internalized versus externalized symptoms. For example, problematic video game use was associated with more internalized emotions, anxiety, and depression, interestingly. And while social media, while also, of course, associated with these anxiety and depression, and there have been plenty of studies showing that, it also was linked with an increased connection with externalized issues like aggression and rule breaking. That's really very fascinating. Now you throw in readily available hyperpotent THC and perhaps overabundance of Adderall, whether it's too easy to get through a prescription through some of these telehealth companies, or you're getting it from a friend, which happens very commonly. This seems like we're dumping a whole lot of addictive potential behaviors here, all on teens' brains. And I don't know, I can see why it can be really a distressing time for kids right now.
Yes, I can see that too. And if kids know what's going on in the world too, there's a lot going on. My heart breaks for them because it is a very difficult time. And growing up with these phones, I think that one of my messages is that these phones, if we can hold off and have kids not have a smartphone for a while. Flip phones are good.
Yeah.
Right? Let's bring the flip phone back, because it really is just getting a hold of your child. That's what you want to do. And you can do that with a flip phone. But what kids can access on their phones, they can access drugs very easily, right? Snapchat, all of those things, they can find drugs very, very easily. And also, not to mention other avenues that they can find. And when we look at just the message that it sends, especially when I look at young women or young girls who are posting through all the filters, through everything.
Talk about low self-worth, huh?
Yes. And then they get these likes that come in and, oh, you look great, all this stuff, but it's not them. And how does that make you feel deep inside? Not good. Where does that do with your worth? And so we, as a society, need to deal, as I said, deal with our emotions. We need to talk about it. We need to get help. There are so many people. That's why I tell kids, if you're going to see somebody, a therapist, and you don't connect with them, find someone else. You got to get in parents. You have to just keep trying until that child finds someone that they can really connect with. And a lot of people don't get the help that they need. And a lot of kids feel very isolated. And it's between these phones, the eye contact, meeting with people, going outside and playing. When I grew up, we were told, go outside, do not come back in until the street lamp comes on.
Right.
And there were times we'd be bored out there, but we would make up a game. We'd do something different, come in for water, come in for food, and then you're back out. And I wish we could put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, I do too. I have a 2-year-old, and unfortunately, she loves being outside. So that's I'm hoping to carry on that tradition. And I, I'm a millennial. I grew up with a flip phone. I didn't have a smartphone until I went to college, and we did have social media. It was MySpace, but it was on what we call big internet. You had to use it on a desktop. Or one of the giant laptops we had then, right? I think there's something to be said about maybe deleting apps off your phone and only accessing it through big internet, as it were. Consider that like a type of dose control. But
Right.
we're not here to hear what I think. We're here to hear what you think. You've already mentioned a couple of these, like perhaps we should have a regulation capping THC concentrations. And this is more of a soft P policy, but parents should hold off on giving their kids a smartphone until perhaps an older age. I've seen, for example, the researcher Jonathan Haidt mentioned 16 as the minimum. I think that's a reasonable goal, especially if we all culturally agree on it. But in terms of the broader scope, the broader perspective of preventing drug use during adolescence, better access to mental health care, and a lot of these other topics you've mentioned, what policies do you think you'd like to see at the federal, state, or local level to make this a bit better for people?
Mhm. I think that need to we need to change our education system.
Yeah.
And I I feel that, as far as policy goes with cannabis, the
Mm,
one which we haven't talked about yet, that is with the Delta-8, Delta-10, all of
mm,
those, the different THC derivatives that are out there,
right.
that all needs to go away.
Huh.
So those different products that are out there that we can buy in Tennessee, right, that you can buy at any store, as long as it doesn't have more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC, because that's
Right.
found in marijuana. I do worry about the scheduling of marijuana, because they want to reschedule it to Schedule 3 from Schedule 1.
Mm,
And so if that were to happen, I worry about it's going to reduce the perception of harm. I have seen that the arguments for rescheduling from Schedule 1, which means addictive, no medicinal purposes, to Schedule 3 means that they can do more research on the medicinal or medical impact or medical effects that cannabis can have or THC can have. So I think that there are benefits to that, but the one part that I worry about is the perception of harm. If
right.
we are to make it Schedule 3, now Schedule 1 or 2, you can't traffic. It's federally illegal to traffic a substance at Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, meaning that the industry themselves can't write off any business expenses. So in the long run, there's a tax code where they can't write off
Interesting.
any business expenses. But if it turns to Schedule 3, they can write off all their business expenses. So I think that that's
Ah,
interesting. So
yes,
we can see where that's coming. But I would
undoubtedly.
say that as far as substance use, we need to have policies about the internet. We need to have policies about in schools. I do think that kids, which I think most schools do now, where they can't access, the broad internet when they're there at school.
Mm,
Having phones during school, I think they should be in a pouch somewhere if that's where they're
yeah.
going to keep them. I think that I've got a lot of strong opinions about some of those things. So as far as policy goes, I would say the THC derivatives there needs to be regulation, or they need to basically stop being able to make these THC derivatives. I think that we need to have phone policies on a national level. And I know that there's a lot of countries that have just pretty much outlawed even kids using smartphones, until they're a certain age. I
Wow.
know in Scandinavia. I think as far as education goes, that we need to educate kids about their brain.
Yeah. teaching kids about their brain, I think is such a huge need. It just strikes me there are four huge topics that we really should be talking about in high school for sure, maybe even earlier in some instances, but we need to bring back home ec. I think learning how to do simple home fixes and cooking for yourself, and there's a whole lot to be said there. That also ties in with self-worth and mental health, and like how do you take care of yourself at home, I think is an important lesson. Physical health, we kind of have, in some instances, there's like a health class that's usually a semester, doesn't go very far or in depth, but psychology, I think, is one. I think, understanding personality disorders and trauma and risks of anxiety and depression and so on. And then fourth, probably taxes. How do you do your taxes? I think is probably, it is a meme often, but anyway.
No, I think that's beautiful. And really, looking at another thing, music and art. And if we could teach kids about their brain, and then we could show them that music can give the same dopamine release that, a drug gives you, right?
Oh, God,
just to try and teach them that these creative paths you go down are so beneficial to your brain.
Yeah.
And, good dopamine. I know, I don't know. Do you play music?
I do, actually. I'm a multi-instrumentalist. And one of my favorite quotes is Einstein would describe his thinking as muscular. And when he was having trouble with a problem, he would go play violin for a while. And then usually the answer would come to him.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I play too. I play guitar. But there's times that I can sit down
Awesome.
and, 3 hours go by.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Just
Yeah.
being mindful is really, we're so distracted. And that's where I think the phones, if we could put down the phones, and I'm guilty too. But my favorite game now is if I go to the airport or somewhere where you're standing in line, and I watch all the people who are in line and they have their phones out, because we don't talk to each other anymore, or going and sitting at a restaurant at an airport, and even people who are together, there could be a family together and everybody's on their phones and nobody's talking to one another. And just watching as you walk down, every person it's like another appendage that we have, right?
Yeah.
And I try to hide my phone, and it's hard, but I want to pick it up. And so I count how many times I want to pick it up and look at it, especially if I get my watch gives me a little notification and I'm like, oh, what is that? And that's that dopamine right there, that little notification, little dopamine pushing me to go check my phone.
Yeah.
So we need to, just dial that back, and really the internet, or I should say social media in general too, we need to push back more, I believe, and push back particularly for kids about how it's affecting their brain. And that's one of the things that I really feel strongly about teaching kids, about how social media and stress and also substance use, and just teaching them how it affects their brain and the impact, just how neuroplasticity plays a role in that, and teaching them about that. Why do they not know about that? Because really understanding that you are in the driver's seat, your choices, you always have a choice. In everything you say, everything you do, you have a choice. And those choices are basically etching that circuitry in your brain, right? It's like an album, the grooves that they have in there. And the more you do it, the more it's going to etch that in your neural circuitry and become default. And same way drugs do, right? Or your social media on your phone, whatever it is, that you could stay on there for hours. And so just trying to teach kids about that the impact of all of these things on their brain, but mainly teaching them about neuroplasticity and what's going on in their brain, and synaptic pruning and all that stuff during adolescence. Be beautiful.
All right, man, I really could talk to you for quite some time, but I feel like that's probably a good place to stop. Just wanted to say, I think we'll probably be reaching out. I think there's a good chance we'll be reaching out to have you back on, because it sounds like we really only scratched the surface on so many different things here.
Well, I would love that. And as I said, my heart really does break. My heart breaks for, I just, like your 2-year-old, I just want to just give her a brain manual, like going on, like just something as she goes along and just learning, but teaching her about that and just how beautiful that is, because it really is what's going on. And it's just, how do we do that now? How do we implement that into the school system? That's what I want to do.
Well, I think you're doing a great job so far, and you're already reaching a lot of people in Tennessee and abroad. So, Dr. Kristen Gilliland, thank you so much for joining us on the Smart Policy Podcast. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
For more episodes on in-depth discussions on Tennessee policies related to substance use disorder by a range of local experts, please subscribe to us wherever you get podcasts and visit our website at smart.tennessee.edu. I'm Jeremy Corvelis. Thank you for listening, and see you next month.